I'm going to try to give you some perspective about concussion, the history of it, and what has been done around the world to try to educate people about concussion. And I always follow Jamie Kissick on this program, and he always shows pictures of himself as a hockey player. And so, can you recognize me here? I am there. I just want to establish my own credentials as a hockey player. So, hockey is a great game, and certainly in my own youth, I played hockey virtually every winter day of my life until I was about 20. And when I was a kid, I could actually skate to school, and some of the players that I played with are still very good friends of mine, and in fact, supporters of the organization that I volunteer for, which is Think First. And I had a lot of hockey heroes when I was a youth. And this is certainly one of my heroes, Dr. Tom Pashby, who founded the Dr. Tom Pashby Sports Safety Fund. And early in my career, he was a mentor to me in terms of preventing injuries in hockey. As you know, he virtually eliminated blind eyes in hockey because of the activities that he undertook to evaluate the number of players with major injuries to the eye. And then he went on to tackle other problems like spinal injuries, where he was very passionate about reducing them, and finally we did. And also with hits to the head. I think he was one of the first to call for a real discussion of hits to the head as something that we need to do something about in hockey. And you've heard this morning about the importance of education in warning people about concussions in hockey and other head injuries in hockey, and that we have to reach all of these people, and that this is very important because it will actually save lives and prevent disability. And in the injury prevention field, we think of 5 major ways to try to prevent injuries. Engineering, which we're going to hear about, education, which I have been involved in, but also enforcement and legislation, which I'm going to mention during this talk, and the importance of collecting information about how many injuries occur, exactly how they occur, that we need solid evidence about them in order to prevent them. And then we need to evaluate programs of prevention to make sure that the effort we're putting into prevention is actually paying off. So in terms of the game, I personally never had a concussion in hockey, but I did in football, and I never wore a helmet. And we've heard, in fact, that helmets really don't prevent concussion. They prevent the other serious brain injuries, like the Don Sanderson injury a couple of winters ago when he died as a result of an injury to his head, and his helmet was knocked off so that it was his unhelmeted head that hit the ice. We are faced with risk-taking behavior. We're faced with media that encourage some of the violence in our sport. But when I played, we had coaches that taught respect, and we have to depend on our coaches to do that. And we did want to win, but we wouldn't kill for it. It has been mentioned before, but I want to mention it again about the importance of looking at our website to fill in on concussion information that you may be missing today. To bring this into perspective, the importance of brain injuries in general, that about half of the injuries that we see, the deaths that occur from those injuries, about half of them are due to head injuries, and the long-term disability that people suffer after trauma is often related to the brain injury part of it. And just to drive home the point that has been made already this morning repeatedly, that we are faced with a number of types of brain injuries, and concussion is at the top of the list in terms of frequency. The other types of injuries are the more catastrophic type of injuries. Concussion, however, is a brain injury, and it took a long time for that message to reach the public. But I think most people in our country now are coming to grips with the fact that a concussion just isn't a ding or seeing stars, but that a concussion actually is a brain injury. And in terms of the brain injury picture, what happens in sports and recreation is an important piece of the pie. So I think it is important to have concussion seminars like this. And we do feel that the younger brain is more susceptible to trauma, so that our emphasis really has to be on young people, although we would like to see all hockey players protected. And we've heard about the difficult issues. And in terms of concussion education, these have been very difficult issues for us to deal with because, in fact, the definition of concussion has changed, and a lot of people don't know about that, including members of my own profession. And we unfortunately continue to see people who are actually mismanaged by medical practitioners, although that is becoming less common. And then we have new things that are coming on the scene to come to grips with. For example, this condition called CTE, which we now recognize as a sequelae or a complication of repeated injuries to the brain, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And then the issue of when to return to play, and we've heard this morning about return to play guidelines, the 6-step guidelines. So that is an evolution. That is something that we have come to recognize over the past few years as an important aspect of this. And then, as Dr. Kissick mentioned, how to avoid the second impact syndrome, which in fact can be fatal or can produce lifelong disability, and the prevention of that from happening occurs by you, and you, who prevent the player from returning to activity before they have fully recovered from the first concussion. This issue of how does a concussion occur, and we've all grappled with this, and this is about the best slide that we have seen. Can you put the video on? So this shows, in fact, the movement of the brain within the skull. And just run that again. So when you hit a solid object, or when your body is subject to a whiplash, that jiggle of the brain within the skull is what we feel causes concussion. And that, in turn, is exactly why a helmet will to do all of these other things of reducing hits to the head and improve our coaching, etc., to solve the problem. And so there is an issue that we really do not have the exact mechanism for concussion, other than to say that it is that movement of the brain within the skull. One thing that modern science has taught us, and we have to emphasize in our educational programs, in fact, is that the young brain is more vulnerable to injury. So yes, that has occurred, and that's why I think first we do concentrate on young people. So we feel that the concussion education, the enhanced recognition of concussion, the enhanced knowledge of concussion, how to manage concussion, when to return to play, that all of this is going to reduce the disability of concussion. And at Think First, we have had a number of projects that we have used, and Jamie Kissick referred to the Smart Hockey program, for example, that has been in existence for many years and which will be updated shortly. And so early in 2011, we will have yet another resource to help people handle concussion. So this just lists all of the projects that we have been involved in, and they are virtually all on our website. One of the important things that has been realized right from the start is that it really requires an army of volunteers and organizations to tackle the problem of concussion. And certainly we see the importance of Hockey Canada in spreading the message, the individual leagues. We mentioned the issue of fair play or franc jeu in Quebec as a mechanism of reducing concussion. So it does take an army of individuals and organizations putting their heads together to tackle this problem. And education is not only for coaches and trainers, but referees. Referees set the tone. Yes, the most important person at the rink is the coach, so we have to reach the coach. And we have to know when to sideline a player, when to terminate. I mentioned this first program, Smart Hockey, with Mike Bossy, which was very popular for many years. It concentrated on spinal injuries. And then we went on to this program, which was developed in 2001 and now is going to be updated in 2011. And what we say is that it's not enough to show this once to players. This should be shown every year. Every player, every year is the model. There's a new set of players each year. We need to refresh the memories of last year's players about how to play the game safely and for fun. And we need to remind players about doing up the helmet properly, about getting a properly fitted helmet, and that the importance of that has already been mentioned. I think first we put together this Concussion Education and Awareness Committee, again, an army of people, in this case multidisciplinary. Many of them are in the audience today, and speakers, Jamie Kissick, Pat Bishop, Lois Kelchman, etc. And this group has been working away to prevent it. And like other groups in concussion education, we base our advice on the experts. And here again, this has been a wonderful evolution that we do have much more scientifically based information to advise us on what to recommend. I have to flag the importance of the Canadian Academy of Sport Medicine in this. They were first off the mark in developing guidelines of when to see a physician, etc., that every concussed athlete should see a physician. They were the first to enunciate that clearly. And then we've been guided by these international conferences that have grappled with the issue of diagnosis and management. And this is just a sampling of what is currently on our website. And so there's information available for patients, for players, for their parents, for coaches, etc. So we would hope that practitioners and coaches would be able to handle these questions. And I won't embarrass you by asking each of you whether you know the correct answers to these questions, but you can become knowledgeable about concussion just by looking at our website. There are other important sources of information, and some of them are listed here. For example, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the USA, has done a very good job of of disseminating information about concussion. Hockey Canada has material on its website, USA Hockey. In Minnesota, they call it HEP, and we just were at a conference there where that was distributed. In Quebec, it's fair play, and I have to commend Hockey Quebec for instituting this measure to ensure that respect and fair play and reduction of illegal penalties, that all of that really matters as a teaching tool for hockey and for injury prevention. The rule among preventionists, and I refer to myself as a preventionist, we say there's really no such thing as an accident, that about 99% of these, some people say 95% of injuries are preventable. And unfortunately, at the present state of our knowledge, we cannot treat these injuries properly. We really don't have an effective treatment for people who suffer from the post-concussion syndrome, other than cognitive rest, physical rest, as you have heard. So I'd like to make sure that everybody is aware of the importance of preventing these injuries, because in fact there is no effective treatment for them. And we can prevent these in the first place, and we can prevent the complications of these injuries. And as I've mentioned, we now know that repeated concussions can actually have especially damaging effects over the long run, especially concussions that have significant residual symptoms months and years later. And unfortunately, there are a group of players that we have to say, you have had one too many. And you will see on the right-hand side of this slide that there are players where we have to say, look, you should never return to play. And so if there are significant neurological deficits, or if there have been a large number of concussions over a short period of time, if they've been of high severity, indicating, for example, months to recover. If someone says that it's taken them months to recover a concussion, then what should be going through our minds is that that player probably should never be returned to contact sports. And if there are definite cognitive deficits, if we can demonstrate that a player has residual memory loss, then that player should not return. And then in the few cases, and we certainly know that MRI and CT do not show lesions in the vast majority of cases, but in some of the more severe cases of repeated concussion, we do use these imaging modalities to indicate which players should never return. So in summary, concussions are serious injuries. They can end careers, and there are measures that we can take to reduce them. And one of the more recent measures, which I think we should all be thinking about, and we haven't really decided this in Canada, but just to give you the perspective of what's happening in other countries. So in the United States at the present time, concussion education is now compulsory in some states for high school activities, so that every player, every coach, every parent has to sign a form, for example, in the state of Washington, that they have had education about concussion. So it's no longer voluntary, it's mandatory in some jurisdictions. I'm just going to end up with this, that this is the uniform of the neurosurgical hockey team. This is the ideal for education and prevention of concussions. And to sum up about concussion education, it's called the Lystet Law because of this young fellow Zachary Lystedt. So we have to educate people about prevention, and prevention is the only cure, and it has to be practiced by all of us. So thank you very much for your attention.